Skirmish season is upon us, and lo and behold, it's time to care about Blitz again. Even though LSS doesn't. Levia's been performing well with one of my highest Talishar win rates yet, so let's spill the beans. Bienvenue my Blasmafets, because we're back with a Blitz Levia video. It's been a long time, I haven't played this format in a while, but it is the season because we have skirmishes coming up and there really isn't all that much to talk about with Living Legend Levia. So today is all about our favorite Shadow Brute pre-transformation. But before we get to that, we have a winner from the last video where I offered sleeves up to a lucky commenter. Unfortunately ran out of the advertised might and agility sleeves, but we're bringing back the OG League of Levia. So congrats to the winner, hopefully displayed right here on screen. Now in Blitz, it's funny to say that we're taking a departure from the ball breaker Levia that a lot of people are now experimenting with in CC to instead default back to good old mandible claws. And this is really because in Blitz right now, the format is so fast that we need to be able to play 4-card hands off the rip with minimal setup. And the ball breaker list is really strong at using your arsenal to make these turns very synergistic and milking value out of a longer game where multiple opportunities to swing ball breaker will equate to maybe an entire extra card's worth of value like +3 that you get in a game. But Blitz is really not that format. Blitz is so fast that you are probably only playing about 4 turns in a given game, and we want to be able to see a blood rush, rip that blood rush without too much setup, and the mandible claws are really the best way to get mileage out of that. Now for equipment, generally we're running Scowling Fleshbag, Carrion Husk, Apex Bone Breaker, and Scabskin Leathers, and that's because in Blitz, the ability to use all this chunky armor is just so strong. It's a bit unique to Levia as well with just how much armor we have, and in a game that is very fast, we want to convert our hands to max damage, which means generally not blocking with our cards. We want to convert them to aggressive damage, and using armor to block means we get to then protect our life total, protect our hand, and just do that much more damage and advance the game state very quickly. The other thing to note with this much armor in Blitz is that you do want to use it relatively early because of the potential to flip into Blasmafet Levia Consumed or the very rare Levia Redeemed, but generally because of Blasmafet Levia Consumed, you want to protect that life threshold around 13. But in Blitz, because we start at 20, this is pressured very, very quickly. So what I find myself doing is using armor very early on. We're talking even if it's turn 0 and our opponent is going to leak damage, go ahead and give him armor. I mean, go ahead, block with Apex Bone Breaker so that you can get the +1 might on your first turn and really try to pressure as fast as possible, because if you can flip even with like 1 or 2 blood debt with Consumed, it is still that much stronger for that extra turn that you get with +1 intellect. So generally armor is pressured very, very quickly, and we just have a whole lot of it. Right now in Blitz, there isn't that much arcane damage, so this is definitely going to change with Rosetta bringing 2 new wizards and 2 new rune blades to the format, but right now it's Blaze that we have to worry about. And with Blaze, I don't have that much testing into her to know if this is truly ideal, but what I've been enjoying is Skullhorn plus Arcane Lantern as a AB3 setup. This is very strong for turn 0, where otherwise you leak damage. We're just saying no to that. Plus Savage Sash for Graveyard Fill and a way to let you save resources on your turns where you're going aggressive so that you then can either save those resources to prevent yourself from certain lethal range by being able to pitch into AB, also getting a bit of graveyard fill out of it. I just find it very, very strong, very punishing with these wizards that start at low health. And then Dance of Darkness and Grasp of Darkness, and these in particular with Blaze function kind of different than they would versus Kano, where Kano you're using them to stop a Aether Wildfire for all this multiplicative damage. With Blaze, the best thing they can really do with their on-hits is either get a huge opt-off with Aether Spindle or try to combo you with Sonic Boom, so you can make your call on when to use these pieces to really stop one of those effects. But these are definitely the strongest performers out of this suite next to Savage Sash. It's the AB setup that I'm not 100% convinced of yet, but with all the draw discards and our ability to use Savage Sash to help those aggressive turns, I haven't really missed the second Mandible Claw, but with more games of testing, that might waver, so please let me know what you guys have found. And then into the Emperor, I'm not 100% convinced balanced of the right way to balance AB into the list, but something like this has worked pretty effectively because we have AB2 to dampen when they go for a 0 for 3 spell, maybe on turn 0, and to insulate ourselves on the kill turn. Then Carrion Husk, Scabskins, and Apex for the really strong blocks with equipment, because they are going to pressure our hand quite a bit with physical damage, and then CNC will cover up when they go for Husk. The one tricky part is they can sometimes leak enough arcane damage that Husk is under threat really quickly, and if that's the case, you're going to have to make the call and just block Carrion Husk on a 0 for 4. Last thing before we jump into the deck, we can't help but flex these lovely new tokens that you're going to need to play this deck, and that is a Might and Agility, which you can get on Cold Foil on my Patreon, link above below somewhere on screen. Plasmafet, and we are running Swing Big, so the good old Chicken Quicken is back on the menu. So let's get started with the red base. And this is something that is definitely carried over from the Ball Breaker lists in CC, and that is this trend towards more Go Again in the list. Something that I really have to shout out Mark, who got 10th place at US Nationals, opening my eyes to the combo of what Wild Rides and Pulpings do next to a Shadow Realm Horror list at all. We're jamming all these into the list to not only just have good Go Again rate, but also allow us to be as aggressive as possible, as early as possible with the draw discards on Wild Rides and Pulpings. Dread Screamers and Shadow Realm Horror are going to curve into these play lines where it's either off of a blue, we can Dread Screamer into a 1 cost, Shadow Realm into a 1 cost, where we can lead with Blood Debt being off by one of these, then pitching into one of these, and then following up with either a weapon swing or going even wider. But these are really the bread and butter into searching for more 3-wide turns that are not just Blood Rush Bellows, and they're great for 2-wide turns in and of themselves. Then we've got more of the standard reds that you're going to recognize in the Levia list, and that is the Endless Maws and the Boneyard Marauders, just filling out our cost curve and good rate for our Blood Debt rolls. Then we have Swing Big and Slithering Shadowpede. And these are back in the list because, unlike in a Ball Breaker build where we're trying to use our Ball Breaker as the chain ender, we are looking to deal more damage faster rather than grind out the value that Ball Breaker provides. And that's going to end chains with something like Swing Big. Sneak in these 1 cost like Slithering Shadowpede. On Art of War turns as well, these work fantastically, and with another card that we're going to get to in the blue base, because Tear Limb from Limb is back, these cards also work really well into those turns. So I'm really happy with how the reds play out. They all do something a little unique, and then they blend together in those Go Again rolls when you need them to. Next up for our biggest power cards, of course it's going to be Blood Rush Bellow, and yes, Art of War back again. Now, with the double Mandible Claw list, like I said, ripping into Blood Rush Bellows and just playing them off the top without much setup is definitely how this deck is built to operate, and same can be said for Art of War turns, where you don't really have time to park one in Arsenal and wait for Slithering Shadowpede. You're just going to play them off the rip, because presenting more damage faster gets us to that endgame state of our opponent being forced to block before we are, and even in those must-block states, that's where the above-rate value of our Blood Debt cards shine the brightest. So don't be afraid to really push for these things, and sometimes off of the random draw that's attached to them, of course, the turns can spiral into exactly what you were looking for, maybe something a little bit awkward, but always going to be a lot of fun. Then you've got Beast Within, which doesn't only just combo with Blood Rush Bellow, but we're running those draw discards to really make Beast Within such a spiky card. I really think in Blitz, if you hit the Beast Within, either due to setup or randomly off the top, you are so massively ahead, you are probably going to win that game. Then as a baby Beast Within, you've got the Mark of the Beast synergy. This card works really well in just turning off Blood Debt when your hand is full of draw discards. The cost curve of being able to pitch in a yellow and turning off Blood Debt is strong, but the main thing that this is good for is because Blitz is so fast, sometimes blocking with this card, playing with it, whatever ends up happening to it, the fact that it does end up in your banish zone probably means that if you flip, which isn't every Blitz game, Mark of the Beast is guaranteed to be one of your flip cards. And that's really, really helpful because you don't always have enough time to actually play a Banisher, get all those 2-3 Blood Debt Banish Zone, then flip Consumed. It might be so fast that you're only flipping with like a Mark the Beast and Carrion Husk, but that is good enough. That +1 intellect that Mark the Beast can give you is the chain ender you need for a Blood Rush, the chain ender you need for these draw discard turns. Very, very solid. And then lastly, Absolute All-Star, Graveling in the yellow slot, super flexible card, really playable card, and we're just choosing yellow because it's a little bit less greedy than adding in the reds when we are pretty red heavy. As for the blues, we have our role players of Deadwood Rumbler and Wrecker Romp. These cards are all the better in these draw discard lists because they're not only 6s for discard on Blood Rush or Banish to Art of War, they are going to turn those draw discard hands live. And that is so strong because you often are looking to play those out with double blue already in hand, or even lucking into a blue off the top. And a blue 6 really is the best case blue in those scenarios because they're not going to brick you if you discard them. Of course, Soul Harvest works in that slot as well, and probably not ever played in Blitz, to be fair. The game is not going to go that long, but it's there in case it comes up. Next to Doomsday. Doomsday also not always going to come up in a Blitz game, but if it does, it is so strong. Hands down, you are massively ahead if you get to play the sucker out, and there's so much go again in the deck that you aren't really forced to roll scabs once Plasmafed is out. You're just naturally going to have so much go again that it's very, very live. Next are some blues you might recognize in Barraging Beatdown. This one's a little bit awkward having fallen out of some lists, but what I like about it is that we're in Blitz and we're trying to push that threshold for lethal as soon as possible. And the ability for an opponent to be forced in that state where they block 2 cards on your 6 with go again because they are in lethal threat, to then barraging that last card away and kill them, means that this barraging can basically deal 5 damage in the blue slot, and if it doesn't, then it at least is free to play at any point during your turn and on turn 0, and does block 3 as well. The spicier blues, though, are Tear Limb from Limb. This is one of my favorite cards in kind of cracking the code for Levia in CC, and it's definitely back in Blitz because, like I said, we want to be able to just draw 4 cards and rip those 4 cards into as much damage as possible with minimal setup, and Tear Limb from Limb is perfect for that. You can either use it as your blue, or if your hand is blue heavy, flex it into the actual lead to your turn, maybe even follow with the Mandible Claw into a massive attack. If you can line that up into a swing big for 16, that's insane for a 20 health format. Very, very spiky card, very, very powerful card, and the deck needs blues anyway, and this is one of the ones with the highest ceiling. But speaking of ceiling, no blue is better than just cheating an entire turn cycle ahead of your opponent and ending the game outright. And that's why I've opted for 2 Reckless Swings in the list, because Blitz right now is just, it's very tight. It's a game with very thin margins because of how aggressively slanted decks are right now. And if you can not only present a lot of damage because your deck is built to do that, but then cheat the end of the game with just a Reckless Swing, almost no one can go out of their way to respect it with a 20 health format. They're going to have to be pushed down or otherwise give you a huge advantage in the game anyway. So just the threat of Reckless is so strong. Actually, ending the game with Reckless feels like cheating. Now, as for some of the cards that didn't make it, we already talked about why Ballbreaker isn't in the list a little bit, but there are other blues that look pretty obvious to making their way into Levia lists right now, but I've opted not to run them, and that is namely Dread Screamer in blue, Clash of Agility, and Diabolic Offering. We just don't have a lot of room in the Blitz list right now, and I think all the blues, they're either mandatory role fillers like the blue 6s, or highest ceiling blues like in the Tear, Barraging, and Recklesses. If you add these, they're kind of the middle of the road blues that you're going to add to pad out a CC list because you just have more deck space, but slowing down to block with a Clash of Agility that just might not hit. Also adding a non-6 to your graveyard, a little bit slow for Blitz. Same with Diabolic Offering. Diabolic wants to be in a deck that is generating more agility, so if you're running Smashbacks, if you're running the Clash of Agilities, then the ability to use Diabolic Offering is that much higher. It is still quite strong with Art of War, so I think you can probably get away with still slotting it in over maybe the Barraging, but I've been very happy with how the Barraging performed. And then there's also the Blue Dread Screamer, which is similarly just pretty low rate for what we're trying to do with the deck. If I can swap this slot for basically the Tear Limb from Limb, which is what I did, the Tear Limb from Limb in a way is a 2 for 6 that is filling the graveyard for +2, whereas this is a 2 for 4 that, yes, is turning off Blood Debt, but that's more relevant in a longer game where Blitz is a shorter game, so they just don't quite line up as powerfully as the blues in the main deck. So overall, like I said, I can't sugarcoat it. Zen is so strong in this Skirmish season that I don't see Levia realistically being a better choice than Zen, but Levia has a lot of similarities in what makes Zen so oppressive, which is having very strong numbers and having a really strong equipment suite to basically ignore what the opponent's doing and just play the game all by herself. And she does play that way a lot of the time and can be very frustrating to play against from the opponent's perspective because of that. But Levia has enough awkwardness with some of her draw sequences, enough of this risk and reward that overall, she's just a much more fair deck than Zen ends up being, and that is a bit of the problem in wanting to bring her into a Zen-infested metagame. You're both decks that are pushing out crazy numbers. He just does it more consistently than you, a little bit faster than you, and definitely doesn't have to deal with any downsides like potentially dying from blood debt, which might still happen, rolling a 1, which might still happen. But if you love Levia, I think she is still really strong, regardless of that fact, and I'm sure that she'll do quite well in this Skirmish season. She's been doing better and better. We have a little bit of gameplay to help get you along the way. Okay, it's time for some Blitz! This is the Victor matchup, which I do believe is still relatively popular as far as Guardians go in Blitz. There's Terra and there's Victor. But there's Levia, people, and Levia starting with a Blood Rush on turn 0 is really strong, especially when you luck out and actually have a 3-wide that's playable. In this deck, there's a lot of the draw discards, so I would expect that generally is how it works, but we have a Mark the Beast, which in a way is actually a little bit, it's a bit better. I mean, getting guaranteed banish this early in Blitz can be pretty useful just because the games go so short. And what's even more impressive is that we're following up beautifully with an Ardivore Slithering turn, which then leads into this Dread Screamer beautifully into Mandible Claw. So we're just hitting absolute highs in this game, but that's kind of the deal with how this deck is meant to operate, is you just really don't miss. You do all the BS stuff. You do it hopefully hand by hand, but one of the key differences you're making is actually something we see here, which is blocking very early with armor. I mean, armor in this deck is really all about being used early. You want to prolong high life for as long as possible so that you get to choose when you transform. It's very different than in CC. In CC, you kind of fight for a while, then armor gets really tight in the mid game. But in Blitz, use armor very early. You want to keep your life above 13 because you generally will present lethal in like 2 turns towards your opponent. They probably will have blocked, but if they're a deck that doesn't block, then you are taking cards as early as turn 2 potentially. And even in this matchup, this is a deck that's generally pretty defensive, but here we are at turn 4 and they're at 1. We've flipped as well, which is just absolutely wild. Definitely wasn't expecting that in this matchup, but it's one of the reasons that we did use armor when we did. Now their full equipment has been given to us, and we can just round it out with a Endless Maw. This is like a little bit of a choice I thought about, just keeping the Endless Maw in Arsenal versus the Mark the Beast now, but it's not like we're really under threat of milling our deck out with this, so I'm going to keep the Mark the Beast in Banish just as another tool in our toolbox. Throw the Endless Maw now because our opponent will definitely give us 3 cards for it, so we don't really need to worry about putting it in Arsenal to fight during the next turn cycle, because if we just attack with it, then the next turn cycle is completely our decision anyway, because they're giving us all the cards here. So the opponent was, I think, trapped with a 2-block at this point because they just kind of go AFK until the game is over. So we're just going to move on to game number 2. And this one's versus Nu, and I don't have a great read on where Nu is in Blitz, but this is still a matchup that a lot of people have trouble with in CC. And in Blitz, I find it's kind of interesting because you'd think that it's easier for Levia, being that in Blitz, the life totals are halved and you just threaten that much more, that much sooner. But actually what happens is if the Nu gets ahead on disruption, then you lose windows to actually play the game before your consumed flip is like even an option. Because that's one of the other things you get to do in CC is like kind of use these interrupted turns to play more towards consumed to buy you back into the game. Whereas in Blitz, if you're just under threat of consumed that much faster, you don't really get to use it later. You've got to make that decision pretty early. So some of the choices that you make into Nu do you pretty riskily build towards blood debt, just because you do generally want to go consumed. And if you're not banishing, then you're just not getting there. So you do need to be pretty aggressive on the banish. This attack is kind of interesting because we're thinking about the blocks. I pretty much assume in this situation that she always gets the effect through if I block with 2 cards. So the consideration is, do I throw in armor to like maybe actually deny it, or do I just let her commit her hand here, and then I lose one of the cards in hand? Like, is that actually good or bad for me? And I go ahead and decide this is actually potentially beneficial, because it's going to push them off of Arsenal for sure. And on our end, I mean, it's not like we could really get graveyard fill out of those blocks anyway, so no matter what, our turn was pretty punted. Like, we wouldn't be able to play the game no matter what just because of where the graveyard was. So if we instead let this through, there was a chance where they banished the Dread Screamers and we actually get to flip. So that actually, it worked out. Like, that was the option in that hand, is this doesn't really play, graveyard doesn't really play. If they go for this, then we get to flip, actually. And maybe that buys us back in. Now, the opponent, I don't know if it's like really heads up or what, but they decide to just not attack into us when we have Carrion Husk up and just let it die. Now, from my position, that's great. Like, it means my Husk basically IP4'd them. Like, that's massive, right? From their position, they think, oh, haha, like, I've wasted their Husk value. But if they just went ahead and attacked with something, then on my end, I would have to struggle with, is Carrion Husk enough? They might know that Carrion Husk was always enough from their position, but I wouldn't know that. So I think they always should have attacked, even with Carrion Husk up, just because it puts the onus on me to potentially misplay and mess up how that would have worked. So now we get into the phase of the game where I've got consumed, and I've got some really good consumed targets. I mean, I've got Dread Screamers, baby. This is the good stuff. And in these kind of double blue hands, Dread Screamers are even more valuable because they're guaranteed to push you 3 wide. And when you have Barraging Beatdown, going 2 wide in the late game can be important, but going 3 wide definitely is, because at this point, we're basically guaranteed to like make the Barraging Beatdown deal 5 effective damage, because it's going to come after our Dread Screamers, which is really fortunate for the way the graveyard lined up there, because there's a world where we would have had to use it early to get the graveyard where we wanted. Instead, we can Dread Screamer, close the chain, Dread Screamer again, then Barraging Beatdown on a Claw. And that's juicy. I mean, that's like literally perfect. And that's kind of the reason, I mean, we talked about this already. It's kind of the reason the deck is the way it is. Like, you need to play into the ceilings of all these cards, and we're seeing that now. Like, Barraging Beatdown is 5 damage in this kind of situation. They can't say no blocks. They would have to block at least 1 card, and then Barraging would come in, and boom, that would be that. So pretty exciting. They go ahead and concede because New also gets stuck with some non-blocks sometimes. They didn't have non-blocks, but I think they just understood the game is basically over. So we move into Blaze now, and Blaze is really taxing on our equipment suite, but it's Blitz. We've got the sideboard, might as well use it. I've been really enjoying AB3, along with Savage Sash, Grasp of Darkness, and Dance of Darkness. And initially, the loss of a Claw might feel painful, but one of the things that Blaze does is often force resources out of your hand anyway, because they play like Absorbent Aether. You know, their whole ability is around playing out these cards. By not having the second Claw, you generally do get to still use those resources just to protect yourself instead of play aggressively, which definitely isn't the same rate. It's not like we're saying AB on your own turn is better than that second Claw, but it's flexibility. On top of this deck actually having pretty much everything. It's got the Chain Enders, it's got the draw discards. With Savage Sash, you probably can fit all of those cards to still go 3 wide on a Blood Rush turn. And you only really need to do that once to basically win the game. So, no, you don't have double Mandible Claw. We're only assuming you like maybe see 1 Blood Rush anyway. If you're going to combo that Blood Rush, most likely with your Savage Sash, and then you've got a 3 wide that like just kills the wizard outright. That's like the whole point. So sure enough, we see that Blood Rush. We're going to go ahead and Savage Sash, because this hand wouldn't have worked even with 2 claws. It just like would not function. We get lucky here and find a resource card, but actually there were a lot of redundancies. The worst case would have been to draw like literally another Endless Maw. Well, the worst case would have been to draw a non-6 and discard the non-6, right? But if we drew like another Endless Maw, then we'd have to double pitch in a Mandible Claw, which is at least still possible. If we drew another red and kept the Swing Big, we could have pitched that red for the Swing Big, which was still like pretty nice. Or in this situation, we can play the Endless Maw. We're missing the Mandible Claw swing. We're missing it. But once again, resources on our own turn actually do have value. So sure enough, the opponent did play out the Absorbent Aether. So we'll see if they actually do play out an attack for us to use that AB. But it's not the worst thing in the world. We're basically in the spot where we can just play the game regardless, because we have the graveyard set up in a pretty good spot for us. So Blaze now plays Sonic Boom, and this is actually really interesting because this is not Kano. The damage is not multiplicative. However, Sonic Boom can be like the one card that just turns into free damage. It's the singular card that can just turn into, an Emeritus off the top. And with all their opting, like using Talismanic Lens, it's more and more likely. So I generally try to wait for them to go in on some opt combo with Sonic Boom to use the Grasp and Dance pieces. It's, a little bit early. I think versus Kano, a lot of people would try to wait for the big combo turn. But into Blaze, that is their combo turn. Like, that's all they're doing, is trying to combo ops into Sonic Booms. They've only got 2 of that in the entirety of their deck, and Dance and Grasp can protect against 1 of those. And we see the Blaze actually pitches the other Sonic Boom here, so we are just really free from having to worry about this potential multiplicative damage that the Wizard can throw out. Instead, everything they do is going to be relatively relatively below rate, really, into Storm Striders trying to end the game a turn early. But look at where the life is right now. Like, the life is nuts. We're presenting lethal off of literally like any attack. Our graveyard is self-sustaining at this point. We're keeping 3 in there. So this is very oppressive. Like, our position looks very, very oppressive. But I don't think it comes from being inattentive. Like, you do need to play the game correctly. And I think we've done that at this point so far. It's one of the other reasons Savage Sash is so nice, because the on-demand graveyard fill, comboing off the fact that like it saves your resource base, is just really interesting. It's really unique in doing that, where into Wizard, sometimes graveyard fill is hard, and sometimes using all your resources just means you're dead. So Savage Sash plays like dual role in that, and if we ever need to, with how advantaged we are in life, we can Skullhorn as well to get graveyard fill going. So that might be eventually a line we take, but for now, we're keeping the graveyard at this healthy 3. We want to pass into our turn, have 3 graveyard. Pass into our turn, have 3 graveyard. If we can do that in every situation, that is ideal. So now we get the Art of War Slithering hand. This is what I'm saying. Like, this deck just has so many off-the-rip combos. It's kind of what you have to do in Blitz, I think, compared to how the Ball Breaker list plays. The Ball Breaker list is playing to set an Arsenal card, get a really strong push, go above rate, set Arsenal, do it again, on and on. But the Blitz deck has to be able to play spike your hands off of the draw. Like, it just has to. It's Blitz. You need to just be a little bit greedier, but be more oppressive with these 4-card hands drawn off the top. Art of War plays beautifully into that. Slithering plays beautifully into that. Tear Limb from Limb plays beautifully into that. And we were in a situation here where, by pitching Wrecker first, keeping Tear Limb in hand, we might have comboed all of that together on this one turn. Instead, with the Blaze playing out all their cards, we can instead just count down the exact amount of resources that we need to at least present lethal, which actually is basically spending all of our resources. We were absolutely clear to do that, because even if we draw double red, that would pitch into Slithering, or even pitch into Claw at that point. But instead, we're just having a little bit of fun clicking around all the buttons here, and then end up being able to throw Slithering into Claw anyway. So that is that, folks. That is a bit of Levia game play. Hopefully you all enjoyed, and good luck this Skirmish season.